Hey y'all, welcome back to a new episode of MgM Paints. This time we are focusing on Trench Crusade and the faction of New Antioch. I'm so happy to finally have these miniatures in my hands. I bought a 3D printer specifically to 3D print some of these models, and these were the second batch of models that I've ever printed, and I'm absolutely in love with them. They've painted up nicely, and I'm going to show you how I did it using mainly Army Painter speed paints. Now, I started with a gray primer. You can achieve this with a rattle can, an airbrush, or a brush on, and then I came down with a white zenithal from the top. Now, all of these models combined took a little over an hour, so I do have the mechanized infantry, the yeoman, and the lieutenant to show you today, and I'm absolutely in love with these models. The models are crisp, they have a lot of character, they're chock full of details, and even the patches on the shoulders show through, as you can see here. It's just, the detail on these miniatures is absolutely incredible, and what you can do with 3D printers is insane. But to start, we are going to use the Army Painter's Speed Paint Camo Cloak, and I'm going to be using this primarily for the green on their trench coats. I do get the brush wet and then wipe it off on a paper towel before getting the paint. You don't want to mix this with a lot of water, so I do kind of dab it off on a paper towel and then I get the paint on the brush so the brush tip is at least moist. What I find with speed paint is you don't want to apply too little or push it too thin, so you'll see me consistently going back to the palette and getting more, filling in those areas in the crevices, and then just kind of dragging it downwards. It's going to dry very nicely even if it looks a little splotchy right now. Another thing that I love about speed paint is the way that it goes into the recesses. Capillary action, I guess is what they call it, but the paint just rolls off the tip of the brush. A lot of times when using normal acrylics, we have the need to really try to push that paint into certain places. With this, it's just not the case. It works similar to an ink, where as soon as your brush hits the model, the paint just rolls off onto where you want it to go. The speed paints used serve a really good purpose in that they provide a base coat as well as a shade or a wash all in one step. For me, they strike a very important balance between achieving a quality tabletop paint job as well as efficiency in how quickly I can get the models done. Now you'll see me flipping throughout the models today. This is the lieutenant, and I'm going to be giving him a similar base coat of the camo cloak on the coat that he is wearing as well. As a quick note, if you find the video useful or like it or just want to help more people find it, be sure to leave us a like down below. Now this is the mechanized infantry, and I absolutely loved this model when I first saw it. This is the reason that I wanted to go with the New Antioch as one of my first factions. There is a little bit of layer lines which is noticeable around the top, but it actually paints over very nicely. Now, one of the things that I'm going to warn you about is how speed paint goes onto these larger flat surfaces. It goes on pretty blotchy, and that is something that I knew would happen, but I also had a plan for this miniature, and I just wanted to get a quick base coat down. If you wanted that nice smooth coat of paint, I would highly recommend going with a normal acrylic, because the way that this speed paint is going to dry on a lot of these larger flat panels, it is not going to look very appealing on the first go. I'm going to push forward, covering this model up. It takes really no time at all working with these speed paints. You can really just lay it on, and however it dries is how it dries. We're going to cover up some things in some future steps. Moving to our next step, I do grab Satchel Brown. This is another speed paint from the Army Painter, and you can make these in a variety of colors. You can go black, you can go with a lighter brown, you can do grays. For me, I just wanted to do traditional brown leather type looking backpacks. I'm going to do this as well as get some belts and straps and those kind of things. Once again, I'm going in with a pretty heavy brush and then just kind of spreading that around, consistently going back to the palette, getting more, and getting it into the recesses. I am going to use this color to get the pants that they're wearing as well. And you could use a variety of colors for this, blacks, browns, grays, or you could even go with camo cloak again and make it tone on tone. Remember, these are your miniatures and you can paint them any way you like, so this video is more just to help give you some ideas. The next speed paint that I use is going to be hardened leather, and I have found that this is a pretty good color for the wood on guns, and you can also use this for pouches as well. Now, one thing to note is I'm trying to be neat for the camera. You do not have to be neat. You can slop this stuff on and we're going to clean it up later, because even if you covered the entire gun right now, we are going to go through with some metallic and we would paint right over it. So again, while I'm trying to be super neat and taking my time, you could really just cover the gun up in this color at this stage if you wanted to. You can also pick out some other things. For example, this gentleman has an entrenching tool, so I am going to get the handle of that, as well as cover up maybe the sheath on a knife that he's wearing. Really, you can make these any colors you want. Over for the lieutenant, he's got a piece kind of underneath his coat, if you will, and the piece of armor that he's wearing, so I'm going to get that in this hardened leather color as well. Up next, we go to get the silver bits, and I will use the Army Painter Plate Mail Metal. This is a bit of a brighter silver, but we are going to tone this down. Now, for a lot of these, you may see red helmets, and you could certainly paint them that color as well. For that, you could go with a speed paint Slaughter Red or Blood Red. That's going to give you a really nice saturated red that you can highlight up from. But for these guys, I went with Plate Mail Metal. In addition to the helmet, there will be a few pieces on the rifle that he is carrying, so I quickly highlight those as well. This is where I mentioned earlier that if you covered the whole thing in a speed paint, you'd be coloring over it right now anyway, so you do not have to be that neat when going through with these initial steps. For the lieutenant, I'm going to go through and get his sword as well as the helmet that he is wearing, and I am going to get the submachine gun that he has on his hip, as well as the shield that he is carrying as well, the outside of it, and we're going to do something with that more than just leaving it silver. But he does have a few medals that he's wearing. He's going to have just a few more pieces that we'll need to pick out in silver. The lieutenant also has some pieces of chainmail that you're going to want to catch in this color, as well as a breastplate. And if you noticed, I haven't went back to the mechanized infantry just yet, and that is because I'm still allowing that base coat to fully dry before I come over the top and start dry brushing. Alright, moving along, we're going back to the speed paint. I'm going to pick up some sand golem here to get these gaiters or anklets that they're wearing, and I just kind of want these to stand out a little bit. Again, this is one of those things that could be any color that you choose. I just decided to do mine in sand golem, and these are going to highlight up nicely in a later stage. I will also use sand golem to get the bedroll that this yeoman is wearing, although I highly doubt he's going to ever have the chance to use it. Now, I did notice that he may be wearing gloves, and I decided to touch a little bit on the top here just to kind of pick that area out, although I am going to paint him with flesh showing. I repeat this process on the lieutenant, and then I go through and start to get some of the flesh areas, and I go through with the Army Painter Crusader skin and just highlight those areas. For these guys, they are probably wearing gloves, but I did paint at least the fingers a flesh color, as well as the faces. For the boots, just to prevent the continuous use of the same tones, I do go through with the Army Painter Dark Wood and get those. For the lieutenant, I go through and get the back of his shield. Up next, I grab the speed paint Bony Matter. You could easily use Pallid Bone or any other color here. Heck, you could make this camo green. I did just want to switch it up for these cuffs that are on his trench coat to just kind of make them stand out a little bit. For some of the accessories that they're wearing, I think this might be a landmine of some type. I do use Grim Black. I go through and get the entrenching tool and anything else that you would want to be black. This is a color that you could easily use for boots or anything else. As a note, from some of the weapons earlier that I covered in silver, I do go over them with Grim Black as well. This makes them black, as most weapons kind of were back then, but it also gives just a little bit of silver that's shining through, which I like the effect of that. That is also what I'm going to do for this shield. So I did undercoat this with the plate mail metal, and now I am going over it with the speed paint Grim Black. And I really like the effect that it gives, as it's not a solid matte black. It actually has a little bit of silver showing through underneath, which gives it a nice effect. Next, I grabbed the speed paint Gravelord Gray, and this is what I use to go over the silver areas, and I apply it like it is a shade or a wash. I really like the way that this paint acts over metallics, as it really gives how washes used to be before they updated to the new formulas. The paint really runs into the recesses like a wash or a shade would, but it also really kind of tones or tints the model down, which I really like. So any of those areas I painted silver, such as the helmets, the swords, I'm going to go over with this color, and it's going to act as my wash or shade. Up next, I grab another speed paint, Pastel Indigo, and I just kind of go in and dot the top left and the bottom right on his shoulders, as that is how this insignia is. For the Lieutenant, I wasn't really sure what to do with his, so I decided to make one side the Pastel Indigo, and the other side we're going to make red. Next, I grabbed Slaughter Red. You could easily use Blood Red, Poppy Red, any red that you wanted to. I go through and just dot in the opposite sides of this insignia, and we're going to clean some of this up with a little bit of Gravelord Gray here in a minute when we go in and give it a wash. Over for the Lieutenant, because his did not have the 4 sections, again, I did one side blue, the other side will be red. You may want to consider using this red and the blue, maybe some yellow, to get some of the metals he's wearing. I think I went in with the Slaughter Red and some Ancient Honey, which is a yellow color here, just to kind of make those stand out a little bit. Over for the Yeoman, I will use Ancient Honey to get that little piece of insignia that is on the middle between the blue and the red. And again, really liking the speed paint because it just rolls off here, and I'm not trying to be super detailed, I'm just trying to create the effect that I want people to see from a distance. With all those base coats out of the way, the mechanized infantry was dry, so I decided to go in with a dry brush. As you've noticed, the speed paint that we used earlier has dried pretty splotchy, so this dry brush, while called a dry brush, I do have a little bit of moisture on my brush that I have wiped off on a paper towel, and then I've gotten some paint, wiped off the paint on the paper towel, and I'm going through and just trying to smooth some of that out. This paint is Army Green from the Fanatics line of Army Painter. And again, just going through in circular motions, I'm going to try to leave that dark green in the recessed areas and just kind of coming in at a 45-degree angle, really working my way up to where the light would be coming to the top. You can see as I work these panels down at the bottom, I'm not trying to get in there and get all of it because I do want some shadows left behind of that darker green while bringing out this lighter green on the top. Dry brushing is a great technique to learn, especially for beginners. It does allow you to create some really effective transitions without the use of an airbrush. Now, while I have this Army Green on my palette, I'm going to go through and give a nice dry brush to the trench coats that the Yeoman and the Lieutenant are wearing as well. The goal is similar, where I want to leave some of that darker green in the recesses and just build up some volume where light would be hitting the coats. Maybe they've been faded, they've just got some wear and tear on them. Now, it is important to let the dry brush that you're putting on there dry as well. If not, you can experience some streaking, almost kind of powdering on the model, if you will. So be sure you let that dry. Again, I put on a really quick layer. I went over to the Yeoman and the Lieutenant, did some highlights there, and then came back to the mechanized infantry to give it another pass. Now, one thing I love with the Army Painter's new line of the Fanatics paint range is they give you the color triads. So I went and found the next one up, which is Necrotic Flesh. And I'm going to go through and give some highlights to the trench coats that the Yeoman and the Lieutenant are wearing. I'm also going to give some highlights to the mechanized infantry with this color as well. And really, I'm just kind of focusing on those higher areas. I also use this color kind of towards the bottom for some weathering, and it is just a regular acrylic paint, and I just kind of go through lightly dragging my brush across and creating some additional highlights. And if you happen to screw up, don't worry about it. Right here you'll see me apply way too much. I quickly dip my brush in water, get it wet, and then wipe it all off on a paper towel. I then go through and soak up all of the paint, wiping it off on a paper towel repeatedly until it's all gone. In addition, if you lay on too much, sometimes if it's in a spot like this, you can just quickly wipe it off with your thumb. Now, over for the mechanized infantry, I go through and give highlights with the necrotic flesh as well. These are more kind of those panel highlights where armor would be touching armor, and you've probably seen this kind of highlighting method before. Here you'll see where I screw up. I quickly just use my finger to dab it back off. Again, you could put some water on there as well and then use a dry brush to start soaking that paint back up. So this is something to where you want to be careful, but if you make a mistake, it is totally not a big deal. It can easily be fixed. This is a bit of a tedious process, and you could go through with another dry brush if you wanted to as well, just getting those higher edge areas, but I do find that this does give a nice effect and well worth the time. Continuing with the mechanized infantry, he does have a minigun, which is pretty awesome. I do go through and coat some areas of silver for the plate mail, for the pack that he's wearing on the back, the exhaust vent. I also use plate mail metal again to go through on the yeoman and the lieutenant, and I'm just going to get some of these high areas that are going to be on their helmets, for the sergeant, maybe his sword, the bolt-action rifle, anything else that you painted silver. If you want some of those areas to stand out, this is where you would do it. Up next, I do want to give a quick highlight to the skin, and if more skin was showing, I would typically do more highlights. I do just grab Vallejo Dark Flesh, go through and give quick highlights to the nose, the cheeks, the chin, and the fingers, and the areas of the hands that would be showing, leaving some of that darker area in the recesses. I then grab the Army Painter Fanatics Greedy Gold and go through and get this insignia on the Lieutenant's shield, just to make that really pop out. On the other side, I do get the insignia that are on his cuffs here, as well as some of the medals that he's wearing as well. Next, let's go ahead and touch some Gravelord Gray into the insignia on the yeoman. This will kind of make this blend in a little bit and provide some depth. For the minigun over on the mechanized infantry, I do go in with some Grim Black. I will then give the silver areas a shade using Gravelord Gray. For basing, do whatever you like. I had some of the dark wood still on my palette, so I just went with that. I then use Vallejo Iraqi sand, and this is one of my favorite things to do for these models that are out in the weather, the dirt, and the dust. I go through and give everything a very light dry brush of Vallejo Iraqi sand. If you've watched any of my other painting videos, you know that I do this a lot. I get the bottom of his trench coat to really kind of create that dirt, dusty kind of a look. Also, it highlights really well on the leather, as well as the coat that he's wearing. This color looks great on the pants if you've painted those brown, and I'll also use it to go over the base as well to give that a little bit of variation. I repeat this technique on the mechanized infantry, and for him, we're going to do a few additional things as well. And this is where I start to play around a little bit. I grab some of the Army Painter's Fresh Rust, and I'm going to start to go over the mechanized infantry just in some random places, creating some rust effects. There's no rhyme or reason to why I put rust in certain areas, so really it's up to you, and I would consider this step completely optional. Up next, I'll go through and touch on a mixture of silver and a black color and just kind of dot that in random areas. And you do kind of want to be a little careful here. You can see I got a little carried away on one of his shoulder pads there and kind of, really smudged it up. So I did go back in with a little bit of silver just to kind of touch around in that area. I just figured I would leave it as it is, as this guy should be pretty well weathered where he's operating. Paint your base in a color of your choosing. I did use a beige brown type of color, and your miniatures are officially ready. Now, again, I did paint these up in a little over an hour while filming, so I would say the infantry probably were 20 to 25 minutes per model, and then the rest of the time was on the mechanized infantry. Again, I found the speed painting technique to be a very quick and efficient way to achieve a good tabletop standard in a quick pace. I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any questions, you can let me know down in the comments. At Supporters Club, your names are on the screen now. Really appreciate your support. It's by no means necessary. If you watched the video this far, you've done more than enough to support the channel, so thank you so much. We will see you in the next one. Look forward to bringing Trench Crusade to Battle Report soon. Take care.